Welcome to the Salon at Tokyo College. Today we're very fortunate to have Professor KOKUBUN Koichiro, an eminent philosopher who has written on numerous issues. I have some of his many publications right here. Thank you, Professor KOKUBUN.
Oh, it's really a great honor to be invited and to be able to speak before you. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I wonder if we can begin with your book on the nuclear age in philosophy.
It's tough.
I think it's written in the aftermath of the Fukushima nuclear accident, and you make very compelling arguments. But what really struck me was that you go through the usual economic argument, kind of a social scientific argument about risk, but you spend most of your book on Heidegger.
Yes. Firstly, I have to say that I spent so many years to finish this book. I was so hesitating, and because the nuclear disaster in Fukushima was really shocking. It compelled me to think, but it was so hard to express my sentiment, and at the beginning I was thinking as follows. Yes, it's a disaster, but it's a nuclear thing, and so it's a thing that scientists have to say something about. So researcher in the field of philosophy like me have nothing to say about, but gradually I became convinced that philosophers have to say something, and so I began my research, and the most striking thing was that in the 1950s, nuclear power became popular. 1954, yes, the Americans were really genius. They coined the new expression, atoms for peace. And the tricky thing is that I have to say, to be against nuclear weapon is really natural, and I have to say it's easy, right? And of course in 1950s so many philosophers were against the nuclear weapons, but no philosophers but Heidegger was against the atoms for peace. So that is, in a word, nuclear power plant. So my question was, why only Heidegger? Heidegger is a really polemical person. He was a Nazi. Now we are against. I am against the nuclear power. But in the past, only Heidegger was against the nuclear power, atoms for peace. My question is, when we are against the nuclear power, do we not take the same path, the same way as Heidegger's? We were not taking maybe a wrong way in being against the nuclear power. This is my question. Mm-hmm. So to read Heidegger in his thinking about nuclear power is to assess ourselves So I want to posit this question. I want to ask the question in publicly. So yes, this was my question. Then it was so, I know, I I am in the, of course, I am against the nuclear power. And this book may be some kind of criticism against the movement against the nuclear power. So this is why I was so hesitating in writing this book. Yeah.
I mean, so you provide a very close and compelling reading of Gastineau. It's translated into English as Discourse on Thinking.
Yeah.
But there's a sense in which, of course, Heidegger was against almost everything after Plato. I mean, in Anglo-American philosophy, Whitehead famously says, Western philosophy is essentially a footnote to Plato, but he flips it completely.
Yeah.
So perhaps it's not surprising that he was against nuclear power as well. I mean, he's against Plato and everything that happened afterwards.
Yes. That's that's a very nice question. Oh, how can I answer you? Of course, as you said, he was against all things after Plato. Yes, it's very hilarious thing in a sense. But at the same time, he also says something positive about a dwelling or creating a new dwelling. So he was so critical about the modernity, but at the same time he tried to find something positive in the modernity, and so and he, in addition to that, he did not negate all the techniques, right? He admits the necessity of techniques, what he calls techne in Greeks. So maybe the nuclear power was something special for him, and he. In conclusion, I have to say he does not negate everything.
Of course, yeah. So what I find also interesting about your book is the faith you have in the power of thinking, and yet in some ways, of course, the most profound contribution I think you've made is on the study of the middle voice.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
That is to say, against the prevailing Western binary of active or passive, you suggest this large domain of the middle voice, which of course, as you point out, is very much a major form of discussion in Aristotle and many other philosophers. But isn't that, and then you provide very compelling readings of Spinoza and Heidegger, essentially to kind of fit in with your framework. So the question I have is, of course, in the prevailing Western way of thinking, philosophizing, we're thinking is an extremely active phenomena. And so I'm curious to know how you situate that act within the context that the middle voice is so important.
Act of philosophizing?
Yes.
Oh, act of philosophizing. Maybe I have a right to interpret this word philosophizing, right? For me, philosophizing is firstly, of course, thinking. And thinking, to think. Yes, this word to think in English, this is an active expression, but when we think, do we think actively, right? For example, now I'm thinking, because you asked me some important, heavy questions, and I am forced to think. So I'm not thinking actively, I am thinking passively, right? And this is very famous thesis posed by Gilles Deleuze, one of my specialties. He says when we think, we do not think voluntarily, willingly, but we are forced to think. So if we consider philosophizing as thinking, there is something passive or not active in philosophizing. This is my first question, answer. And secondly, last year I published a book on Spinoza that you kindly brought to this place. Thank you so much all. And I put a subtitle to this book, which is it's very difficult to translate in English. Yomuhito, it's someone who reads, reader, or homo lector.
Yeah, I think in honor of Spinoza, we should just use the Latin.
Yes, so readership. And so I tried to make a portrayal of Spinoza as someone who reads. So philosopher who reads, philosopher, of course, who thinks, but also who reads. I think philosophers not only think, but read. Of course, Plato read, maybe. Descartes read. And Spinoza and Deleuze, Derrida made so much effort in reading. And so reading is, for me, it's a major act in philosophizing. I read. So, of course, read is in a sense active, but of course you read something that someone else wrote. So it's something, it's a kind of passive thing, right? So this is my second answer. Reading is very, very important in philosophizing, and reading is not only active but also passive. So this is my second.
There's a sense I live in the U.S. and in the prevailing tradition of Anglo-American philosophy, there's a devaluation of reading, I think, because there's a sense in which philosophy becomes science, a form of logic, perhaps. And yet, if you go back to Descartes, for example, and Spinoza too, of course they read, but there's a sense in which they write as though they have never read. And there's always this suspicion, I think expressed most powerfully by Schopenhauer, that too much reading is not good for you, because it makes you into a passive recipient. You cannot raise to the level of active or even to the middle voice, I suppose.
It's about a kind of a creation, right?
Right. Thinking, no, it's more about thinking for oneself, I think.
Thinking for oneself.
Rather than just following.
Yes, okay. For example, people always ask where Spinoza came from, where the tradition that Spinoza belongs to, because he's Jew, he's a Jew, he's in a sense Cartesian, and he knows so much about scholastic philosophy, but his philosophy is very, very strange. As Antonio Negri, an Italian philosopher, says, he's an anomaly. He's abnormal in the Western philosophy tradition. So he read so many things, but his originality seems to come from nowhere. But I think he reconstructed or deconstructed what he has read. So I think this is a moment of creation. The moment of creation is not come from nowhere. Yes, so in a sense, I do not believe in a creatio ex nihilo, creation or thinking always comes from something else. And this is maybe, I spent my university days in mid-90s, and I was so influenced by French philosopher Jacques Derrida. And when I went to France, I attended his last 4-year seminars. It is my great time. It's a very good memory of my days in Paris. You know Derrida. Of course, he said so many original things, but he did so by reading. I belong to the generation for which reading matters so much. And maybe it's my limit. And but I really appreciate this tradition, this 20th century philosophy's tradition, reading and philosophizing. And maybe this is one of the reasons that I am not alongside with the contemporary American philosophy tradition, which devaluates the readings. No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
But there's a sense in which, I think you and many people are attracted to kind of this genealogy or tradition of thinking.
Yeah.
So you unpack the past, right? Whether it's Spinoza or Derrida or Heidegger.
Yeah.
And Heidegger is very exemplary. He always goes back and tries to unpack pre-Socratic, sometimes a word.
Yeah.
And I'm not particularly against this in particular, but I wonder what that means in the age of AI, the smartphone, where the very idea of reading is transforming right in front of your eyes or our eyes. If you look at students, they have trouble reading a sustained argument.
Okay.
And so I'm curious to know what you think about this in 2023, what it means to extend this power, this idea of reading in this way.
Sorry, what do you mean by
2020, the year 2023.
Okay.
This year, right
Okay,
now.
this year, right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
When we look at our students, who are looking at their smartphone.
Yeah. Okay, it's a very interesting question. It's a kind of impressionism. Our age is very flat age. We are living in a flat age. For example, you read texts generated by ChatGPT. Okay, it's grammatically right, but you don't feel depth, right? It's because it is generated by AI, and we are now losing little by little this sense of depth, and it's maybe this kind of this feeling of depth was beforehand was formally presupposed by humanities. Humanities, of course, this is knowledge about humans, and they thought that yes, we humans have depth. We are something deep inside ourselves. This is a natural feeling, right? But now we are facing the age that everything becomes flat. And what I want to do is to take back this feeling of depth. And for example, in my book on Heidegger and atomic age, what I did is an irony. Oh, you are against nuclear power, but why don't you think about Heidegger? He was a Nazi and he was against nuclear power. Aren't you in the same way? Or this kind of very bad irony. But this kind of irony yes, it's exaggerating, but I'm also thinking about Socrates and Socrates. This kind of irony force people to think about themselves. Yes, now we need more irony. Humor liberates people. Irony imprisons people in themselves. And yes, with AI, with the internet, we got so many powers of force libérateur. But I think we lost irony. So yes, actually, I was thinking about irony in writing this book, and
it's very interesting you say irony, because there's another way of thinking, I think.
Yes.
There's a very active field of scholarship, especially by French historians, on the history of reading, and of course, it's many different stories. It's partly about technology, the Gutenberg Revolution, and so on. But it's also a sense of the collapse of authority. Because reading was about, in the West, the Bible and Islamic civilization, our Quran and so on. And what the spread of books, this massive revolution in printing did, was to, in some ways, delegitimate or at least hide the centrality of this truth, if you will. And what the smartphone does is actually to dethrone what we do, if you will.
Yes, this one.
The internet says this, not what Professor KOKUBUN says or what Director Haneda says, but whatever is on the internet.
You are really good at conducting a talk.
No.
I'm very impressed. Authority. I'm so interested in it, and I am feeling that I'm becoming very conservative in this way at this age. Now I'm so interested in Hannah Arendt. She's a conservative thinker, I think, but also liberal and conservative. And what she says about authority is very, very interesting. I don't know if I can explain very well, but I try. She locates authority between violence and power, right? And violence, of course, attacks someone and makes people to obey. And power, in other words, according to her terminology, language convinces someone to obey. Okay, the violence and power or speech. And authority is between them. So when authority functions, people obey without being forced. And this is very important, and maybe in politics, but in academia, maybe. For example, philosophers write something, and philosophers publish a books, articles. Yes, it's I don't know if they are true or not, but okay, let's read and verify what they are saying. And this is a kind of functioning of authority, right? As you say, in smartphone. Okay, Mr. KOKUBUN says something. Okay, and someone wrote in blogs. Oh, it's very funny. I read this, and authority collapses, of course. And according to Hannah Arendt, she said maybe in 1950s, she says, we are already living in the age after the collapse of authority. And So, but I think we need some kind of authority. For example, this is my very, very urgent question in Japan. After the government of Abe Shinzo, we have been confronted with the total destruction of authority in politics. Politicians have no respect for constitution. And constitution cannot stand without authority because it does nothing, right? This is kind of just a text. If we respect the constitution, we need some kind of authority, political authority. And we lost completely. And this is why researchers on constitution have been so active recently, last 3, 4, 5 years. And I have a strong impression that we Japanese people are facing the political collapse of the political authority. This is my diagnosis of the political situation in Japan.
If I can go back to Arendt for a moment.
Yes.
Of course, she was, a student of Heidegger and very well read, of course. But I think what impresses me more in some way is that she was able to look at something like National Socialism in her book Origins of Totalitarianism and say that it's actually radically new, that it cannot be analyzed by Aristotle or Heidegger or any of the classics. And I think in Deleuze, for example, in his Transcendental Empiricism, I think he kind of understands that there's a limit to philosophizing, if you will, because the world is changing constantly, it's generating new phenomena. So I wonder, in this age, we're not facing something that is very hard to understand if we just read the classics, if you will.
So
in the age of the internet, the smartphone, we're facing, maybe not revolutionary, but radically new reality that's emerging that cannot be easily understood by reference to the classics.
For example, generative AI, maybe generative AI. Maybe generative AI itself cannot be able to analyze through the philosophies of Aristotle or Heidegger and Spinoza. But what people say about generative AI and what people presuppose in thinking about generative AI can be analyzed by classics. For example, I am so skeptical about people who say AI will be like humans in some years, right? Because in saying so, this kind of people think that artificial intelligence can represent humans. But what about desire? What about consciousness? What about body? These three terms are very important for Spinoza. And for example, the desire, the 20th century psychoanalysts spent so much effort to analyze this concept, and we got no conclusions, right? Lacanian psychoanalysts, yes, they say so many things about desire, but they do not even know how can we generate desire in humans, right? And yes, if so, can we incorporate desire in a server, in artificial intelligence? can we call something human, which does not have a desire, body, or so. In this way, we can criticize what is said about AI by using classics, and because I'm now using my understanding of Spinoza philosophy and Lacanian psychoanalysis. So in this way, the classics matter. It always helps us thinking and to be critical. And yes, this is my sorry. It's a very usual question, but ordinary question. But
so I have one final question.
Yes. Okay.
Which may be Heideggerian in inspiration, and maybe I can make it easier by giving you a bit of a biographical background. So when I thought about going to graduate school, this was back in the 1980s, so, and I went to Germany and France. A very common thing that older professor used to say, because I was interested in social philosophy or social theory, is that someone like you cannot really understand Hegel or whatever.
Okay.
And yet, of course, you do understand. I mean, your mountain of books testify to this. But to me, there's a curious omission in some way, which is that you, I think, never, maybe almost never, certainly, refer to any non-Western or non-European philosophy. And of course, it's possible to argue that the prevailing Japanese intellectual life is thoroughly globalized, cosmopolitan or European, that we should just refer to French, German, and so on, philosophers. But why not Confucius, Zhuangzi, Nagarjuna, who actually say, getting back to your middle voice point, something very close to, I think, what you're arguing.
Good point. Yes. Yes. I have experience of being asked, why don't you write something about Buddhism, for example? Because your theory about middle voice is very close to Buddhism or non-Western thinking or Eastern thinking or Chinese philosophy or Japanese philosophy. Yes, my strong credo, my strong attitude is that I do not go to West from East. I just jumped in the West as myself, and this is my very stupid explanation of my attitude. And I'm so interested in Buddhism or something, and but this is very common that Japanese thinkers become interested after being confronted with Western things, and I'm a little bit fed up with that. Really fed up with that, and this is my first answer. And secondly, this is also irony. Do Westerns understand themselves well? For example, this is why I used Greek language in my middle voice book. Is the Greek culture European? I don't think so. When I learned Greek language, I had a strong feeling that this culture is very, very close to something Asiatic, something geographically, of course. You see the map, and Greek is very close to Turkey and very close to India, and of course they are very, very influenced by the Indian philosophy, right? Why have we have we positioned Greek culture at the center of European things? Maybe, yes, maybe the Greek culture is one of the origins of Western culture, but if this center of the Western culture was not European, and maybe non-Western people can easily become Greek. You know, one of my friends said, "Oh, it's very honor to me." In this book, KOKUBUN-san becomes Greek. You think as Greek thinks, oh, this is very Heideggerian saying, but it's a really great honor. But I wanted to be Greek. And maybe non-Western people can more easily become Greek. It's possible. It's not necessary, but it's possible. So I do understand what your professors said to you in your university days, but in my generation, I do not have such an experience. And yes, in Paris, some professors said so, but my professor, Etienne Barbar, was not so. And, yeah, this is
well, thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedule to
No. It's a very interesting time.
And thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening, and thank you so much.